Hello, welcome everyone to Phoenix Cinema Leicester. Tonight we have Dr. Anna Blackwell, a lecturer from the Center of Adaptations at Montfort University, here to talk to us about Kenneth Branagh, Adaptation, and Murder on the Orient Express. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Becky. The literary critic Joel Plain argues that the great potential of Agatha Christie's work, and the detective genre in general, is apparent not in their final twisting conclusions in which everything is revealed, but in the writing before the ending, and the novel's demands that we return anew to what she calls these deceptively familiar fictions. Like Christie's most famous detectives, Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, we compulsively return to events already witnessed, or in our case, already read, in order to decipher the final hidden meaning of the text. Each return to the deceptively familiar territory of Christie's famous novels is an opportunity to reinterpret and reread, to reassemble the facts. And this opportunity is offered afresh with each new adaptation of Christie's works, and each new addition to the already substantial catalogue of film, television, radio, theatre, and even video game remakes. The most recent addition to this collection came when the poet and crime novelist Sophie Hannah became the first author ever to be commissioned by the Christie estate to continue the Poirot canon of novels. In 2014, the Monogram Murders were published, and in 2016, Closed Casket. This is an emerging genre of detective fiction known as authorial regenerations, and high-profile instances include Anthony Horowitz's new Sherlock Holmes and James Bond novels. Now, this is a particularly intriguing phenomenon because, as critic Alistair Rolls and Jesper Uldal remind us, this actually works against Christie's deliberate plans for Poirot. Unlike Sherlock Holmes, who was resurrected by his creator after high public demand, Christie wanted Poirot to die with her. Her initial intention was to hold back the novel in which Poirot died, and indeed the fact of his death, until after her own demise. And she nearly achieved this. Curtin, Poirot's last case, was published in 1975, the year before Christie died. But despite her preemptive strike, both Poirot and Christie have, in a manner of speaking, survived. Their posthumous careers display an equal amount of overlap. Articles of Christie are invariably accompanied by photographs of perhaps the most popular on-screen incarnation of Poirot, David Suchet, who portrayed the detective for 25 years until 2013, adapting a catalogue of 33 novels and dozens of short stories over 70 episodes. Adaptations of Christie's novel featuring Suchet have been singled out for particular praise because of their perceived fidelity to the original text, and the sense that Suchet became his character in a way that earlier performers such as Albert Finney or Peter Ustinov did not. Famously, Christie's daughter Rosalind observed Ustinov during rehearsal and exclaimed that Poirot wasn't like that at all, to which Ustinov remarked, perhaps deservedly sourly, well, he is now. But from the moment that Poirot's famous moustache was affixed to Suchet's face on set, the actor became Poirot, speaking in his famously accented soft murmur and with his characteristic fussy mannerisms. Suchet is, of course, in distinguished company as Poirot. The first actor to ever portray the character on stage was the great Shakespearean Charles Laughton. Ian Holm played the detective in 1986 on television, and Orson Welles helped dramatise the murder of Roger Ackroyd for radio in 1939. The detective has also exceeded the expected English-speaking audience base for Christie's novels. In the 1950s, Murder on the Orient Express appeared in the German crime anthology, Die Galerie der Großen Detektive, alongside literary counterparts from the minds of Conan Doyle, Wilkie Collins, Mark Twain, and Edgar Allan Poe. He has also been portrayed on screen by two Russian actors, Anatoly Ravakovich and Konstantin Raikin, in 1989 and 2002 respectively, and in 2015 by Mansei Nomura in a Japanese adaptation of the novel. Perhaps the most telling indication of Christie and Poirot's influence, however, is the frequency with which the detective has been parodied. In the comedy sketch show That Mitchell and Webb Look, for instance, David Mitchell's flamboyant caricature of Poirot relies upon the criminals he pursues identifying themselves through the sudden use of sexy villain voices. As one murderess confesses her villainy to startled onlookers, a relieved Poirot shares that he had no idea who the murderer was, admitting instead, "It's been a hell of a week." All of which brings me to tonight's screening, the second ever film adaptation, but fourth general adaptation of Christie's 1934 Murder on the Orient Express. The project was first reported as a remake of Sidney Lumet's 1974 Murder on the Orient Express. A critical and a commercial success, the 1974 film grossed $35 million in America alone and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 1 for Ingrid Bergman as Best Supporting Actress. And although he ultimately proved less successful than later Suchet, Albert Phineas Poirot was well supported by an unbelievably starry cast that included Lauren Bacall, Sean Connery, John Gielgud, Michael York, Anthony Perkins, and Vanessa Redgrave. Indeed, such was the high calibre of the cast that the film promoted itself on posters as a who's who of the whodunit. While the 2017 Orient Express is no longer explicitly marketed as a remake and is instead presented as an adaptation in its own right, it certainly retains some of the hallmarks of the 1974 version, chief among them its equally starry international cast. There are indeed some superficial parallels in casting. John Gielgud's Beddoes has been replaced by Derek Jacobi, a similar veteran of the British theatrical establishment. Lauren Bacall's Mrs. Hubbard is now played by Michelle Pfeiffer. Judi Dench replaces the imperious Wendy Hiller. Penelope Cruz is a Hispanic version of Ingrid Bergman's Swedish missionary. And finally, an early career Vanessa Redgrave is now played by Star Wars The Force Awakens ingenue Daisy Ridley. Other key cast members include Johnny Depp, Willem Dafoe, Olivia Colman, and of course, the film's director and star, Kenneth Branagh. While some audience members might recognise Branagh as an actor from more recent eclectic offerings, such as the doomed Defence Against the Dark Arts Professor Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, or as dour Detective Kurt Wallander in the BBC adaptation of the Henning Mankell novels, or more recently as Commander Bolton in Dunkirk, Branagh is actually most famous, in Janelle Riley's words, as the Shakespeare guy. Over the course of his career, Branagh has become not only one of the leading British Shakespearean actors of his generation, but the foremost adapter of the playwright for film. Since his first film in 1989, Branagh has adapted Much Ado About Nothing, Hamlet, Love's Labour's Lost, and As You Like It. Other non-Shakespearean film adaptations have included, with varying degrees of success, Mozart's The Magic Flute, the Anthony Shaffer play Sleuth, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and the superhero comic book 4 for Marvel in 2011. Under the aegis of the Kenneth Branagh Theatre Company, Branagh has also continued a tradition of actor-managers, which has stretched from David Garrick through to Henry Irving, Herbert Beerbone Treat, Donald Wolfert, and Laurence Olivier. But while he has embraced theatrical tradition in some areas, Branagh has continued the remit of his first theatrical company, Renaissance, to create an accessible, populist version of Shakespeare. To wit, The Winter's Tale, Romeo and Juliet, The Entertainer, and even his earlier Macbeth have all been broadcast live into cinema in a bid to capitalise on a growing cultural phenomenon and in order to make use of the opportunity to widen participation in the theatre. Other efforts to attract a younger and different audience to Shakespeare can be seen in Branagh's casting of established theatre talent alongside more mainstream actors such as Richard Madden, the ill-fated Robb Stark from Game of Thrones, and Lily James, with whom he starred in Branagh's live-action Cinderella, where the two young lovers got more of a fairy tale ending than the one offered by Shakespeare. Tellingly, Branagh has also directed Tom Hiddleston in a short charity production of Hamlet for RADA. Hiddleston's theatre credentials are more substantial than either James or Madden, but he is still an individual best known for his role as Loki in Branagh's superhero adaptation of Thor. Now, this strategy is a key characteristic of Branagh's Shakespeare films. Alongside a core set of British actors who Branagh returns to consistently, including Judi Dench, Brian Blessed, and Richard Briers, his films often include more surprising international choices, which cast not only across race and nationality, but modes of acting and even types of actor. See, for example, American stars Denzel Washington, Michael Keaton, and Keanu Reeves in Much Ado About Nothing, or Charlton Heston, Robin Williams, and Jack Lemmon in Hamlet. Although critics have not tended to agree on the success of these decisions, the choice of these popular actors is seemingly made with a specific logic in mind. Their roles are used to create a popular or a mainstream iteration of Shakespeare. The moody heartthrob Keanu Reeves becomes the villainous Don John, and the action star Denzel Washington becomes the vanquishing hero Don Pedro in Much Ado. Billy Crystal's casting as the first gravedigger in Hamlet, meanwhile, pairs the star's distinctive delivery, his drawling New York accent and laconic pacing, with the gravedigger's wry, nihilist humour. As a director, Branagh thus simultaneously plays actors against type, while reifying a quality of their stardom for which they are best known. Not all such encounters between the Shakespearean and the popular culture occur without resistance, however. The reaction to the news that Kenneth Branagh would direct the 2011 Four offers a useful case study in this regard. It was precisely Branagh's Shakespearean credentials that secured his involvement within the film. Executive producer Kevin Feige wanted a director who wouldn't get lost amidst a unique blend of archaic language, elaborate costumes, and intense spectacle. The British press were unable to reconcile the idea of Branagh the Shakespearean with the superhero blockbuster, however. Despite the campy excess of a lot of Branagh's highbrow adaptations and his tendency to reference popular cultural text, it was deemed an inappropriate pairing. Elizabeth Day, for instance, scoffed at the prospect of a young Branagh ever enjoying comic books, asking, "Really, Ken?" The prospect of a Shakespearean actor like Branagh working on a superhero film seemed risible, a devaluing of the star's high Shakespearean prestige that could prove harmful to Branagh's career and could only serve to highlight Four's relative shortcomings. As time has gone on, though, the media scorn for Branagh's work in mainstream culture has lessened, and the appointment of Branagh to direct Murder on the Orient Express has ruffled few, if any, feathers. This is testament to not only the eventual positive critical and commercial response to films like Four or Cinderella, but to a wider sea change in the careers of British theatre performers. A generation younger than stars like Ian McKellen, Helen Mirren or Judi Dench, but at least one generation older than Shakespeareans like Maria Gale or Benedict Cumberbatch, Branagh's career reflects that of his older peers in many ways. Despite the success of Laurence Olivier, for Branagh, as for his older counterparts, the possibility of working in classical theatre alongside mainstream film and television was impossible or exotic. The current convention, which has facilitated the stratospheric rise of popular Shakespeareans like Hiddleston or Cumberbatch, was by no means inevitable in the mid-20th century. Performers received a grounding in theatre, and only then was their stardom potentially consolidated in film. Even now, prominent figures such as Dench or Michael Gambon participated in this very methodical acquisition of success, slowly attaining larger and larger roles within a repertory theatre tradition in which the actor's fame was second to the complexity of the company. But with the decline of the repertory theatre tradition in Britain, the contemporary actor has been potentially freed from a lengthy service of climbing the ranks of a theatre company. They are instead expected to, and indeed trained, to pursue employment in a combination of theatre, television, film, and commercial work. And there is perhaps another reason why the pairing of Branagh and Christie didn't surprise in the way that Branagh and Four had only 6 years previous. Although very different figures, Shakespeare and Christie have somewhat comparable qualities. They are both authors whose creations have transcended time and popular taste, and whose use within culture evokes very particular ideas of Britishness and Englishness. They're also both authors who dwarf much of the surrounding literary landscape. Shakespeare's success is harder to qualify, but his presence can be found in almost every avenue of contemporary life, whether quoted explicitly or simply alluded to, and in fact both those forms are present in Murder on the Orient Express. Christie is, meanwhile, the most widely read author of the 20th century, and according to her publisher, only outsold by the Bible and by Shakespeare himself. What other recent events have helped challenge the press's perception of Branagh and his abilities, shifting them away from their previously held belief in the incompatibility of the Shakespearean with the popular? I can only speculate. What is evident, however, is that when the first promotional images for Murder on the Orient Express were released by Fox, the surprise shared on social media and in the press was not at Branagh's involvement, but simply at the size of Poirot's moustache. Thank you very much.